Chapter 1 Firebrand, 1923. It was a calm, cool day in January 1923 at Capitol Hill High School in Oklahoma City. Ellie and Sarah were standing with a group of girls having lunch. Ellie turned to Sarah. "Sarah, something's going on over there. Let's see what all the commotion's about." The two girls started running toward a large crowd of students, yelling, "Kick those jerks' asses, Ed!" The girls nudged their way to the center of the crowd and saw Ed Hall standing, fists clenched in front of the two Scott brothers, Ernie and Herb. Ernie lunged straight forward. Ed threw a hard right that landed solidly on Ernie's nose. Ernie's nose exploded like a water balloon hitting a concrete pavement. While Ernie was wiping blood from his face, Ed stood his ground as Ernie struggled to get back on his feet. Ed, focusing entirely on Ernie, lost sight of Herb. The smaller Scott boy circling behind, Herb sprang like a cat pouncing on a rat, landing on Ed's back. Ed quickly grabbed Herb's arm and threw him aside. And with the two brothers now in the fight, things started moving fast. Ed looked back at Ernie, who was now on his feet. Ed, again clenching his fist, was ready to unload on Ernie again, and Ed glanced to see where Herb was, then quickly turned to Ernie, who started lunging forward like a crazed bull. Ed glanced again to see where Herb was, turned back quickly, and threw a punch that landed squarely on an intruding teacher's face. The teacher, Mr. Clancy, fell stiffly onto his back. Ed stood over him with his fist still clenched and his jaw dropped in disbelief. As Ed started to kneel and see what he could do to help Mr. Clancy, he was suddenly grabbed by two more intervening teachers, Mr. Johnson and Mr. Willis. Ed, not knowing what was going on, struggled to pull away. Mr. O'Brien, the largest of the group of teachers, jumped in and grabbed Ed around his neck. Now, with three teachers on top of him, Ed buckled under the weight and fell to the ground. And Mr. O'Brien shouted to Mr. Johnson and Mr. Willis, "This guy's strong. Don't let him up. Might not get him down again." "Yeah," Mr. Johnson yelled. "The thug almost pulled my arm out of its socket while we were pulling him to the ground." Ed finally realized it was futile to resist and stopped struggling. Mr. Clancy yelled to Mr. O'Brien, "I think he's had enough. Let's get the hoodlum to his feet and take him to Al's office." Mr. Johnson and Mr. Willis, holding Ed's arms, marched him to the principal, Mr. McDonald's office. At the same time, Mr. O'Brien helped Mr. Clancy to his feet. "This guy's strong. That's all. You kids get the hell back to what you were doing. Show's over," shouted Mr. O'Brien. "Mark, you're going to have a beauty of a shiner. How you going to explain that eye to Nancy and the kids?" "Shut up, Tom. Let's go see what Al's going to do with that jerk," Mr. Clancy replied. "Okay, Mark, but the eye's a beauty." As Mr. O'Brien and Mr. Clancy entered Mr. McDonald's office, Mr. McDonald, red-faced with anger, yelled, "Where in the hell you two been? I'm getting the police involved in this mess, and I need to know the facts. I'm going to have Ed Hall arrested. Clancy, you should see the shiner you're developing." As Tom O'Brien left the room to get some ice for Clancy's eye, Mr. McDonald turned to Ed and said, "When I get through with you, you're going to wish you'd never met me. You have been a thorn in my ass for years. You've been in this office at least 12 times over the past 2 years, all for fighting, and I've had enough." Ed sat in silence, looking straight ahead with no expression on his face. Mr. McDonald, sitting behind his large oak desk, staring back at him, asked, "What have you got to say for yourself? Now that you've disrupted my lunch, I'm sure all this commotion is going to cause me to develop heartburn." Ed didn't reply. He continued to sit in silence, looking straight ahead. Mr. McDonald raised his voice and snapped at Ed. "Stop staring and say something, Hall!" Ed's silence outraged Mr. McDonald even more. Al turned to Mr. Clancy. "What the hell happened out there, Mark?" I saw there was a fight, jumped in to break up the ruckus, and must have stepped into one of Hall's punches."
"So you don't think Ed hit you on purpose?"
asked Mr. McDonald. "Not sure, Al. I was on my ass before I knew it."
"That's not going to be your story, Mark. What I see is that Ed hit you because you were trying to break up the fight that he started. And that's the story you're going to tell the police when they get here. You got that, Clancy?"
"I think so, boss," replied Mr. Clancy.
"You had better. This is my call."
In a low, mumbling voice, Mr. McDonald asked, "Where in the hell is O'Brien with the ice I sent him to get for your eye, Clancy?"
"Boys, I'll repeat this only once. I want everyone on the same page before the police get here."
As Tom O'Brien entered the room, Al said,
"It's about time you got back, O'Brien. Where in the hell did you go to get a few pieces of ice? The North Pole?"
"It's hard to get anything out of that kitchen, Al. They want a voucher for every crumb of bread."
"That's ridiculous, Tom. Who in the hell ordered that kind of crap?"
"Stella in the kitchen said it was your memo that ordered it," Mr. O'Brien answered.
"I'm sure ice wasn't in that order,"
Mr. McDonald replied. "You're probably right, boss. No one could be that dumb to put ice on an order like that." Mr. McDonald shouted,
"That's enough about the ice. I want you boys to be sure that we tell the same story when I call the police. Clancy, what the hell are you doing? Raising your hand? We're not in a classroom. Put it down and speak up, you dumbass."
Mr. Clancy yelled,
"Al, Ed's listening to everything you're saying. Shouldn't we get him out of the room before we talk about what we're going to say to the police?"
Mr. McDonald declared,
"I don't give a damn what he knows. He's not going to be my problem after today. You boys know how much I despise this thug. He's been a thorn in my rear for a long time. When I get through with him, he'll be out of my hair for good. It's about time Ed finds out how things work in this world. I hope he takes in everything that's about to happen to him. I want Hall to know every detail of how he's going to be framed. Got it, Tom?"
Mr. Clancy silently agreed by reluctantly nodding his head, and Mr. McDonald continued,
"Now I'm going to make a call, so everyone shut the hell up."
Mr. McDonald stood up and started to walk toward the phone. He noticed Mr. Clancy puffing heavily on a freshly lit cigar.
"Put that damn thing out. You know I don't like the smell of those cheap pieces of crap. Mark, you get paid $45 a week. You should be able to afford better smokes than those horrible-smelling things."
Mr. Clancy, still holding ice over his eye, replies,
"Okay, boss. This is the one you gave me at the poker."
Suddenly, Mr. Clancy was interrupted by Al.
"Shut up and put it out. You're stinking up the whole room."
Mr. McDonald began reaching for the phone.
"Darn it, I hate getting up to use the phone. Top school in the city and can't even afford a desk phone."
"Boss, before you call, you may want to talk to some of the kids who saw what happened," Mr. Clancy suggested. Al looked at Mr. Clancy with a frustrated gaze.
"Why in the hell do I need to find out what they saw when I already know what took place? Just keep your mouth shut and let me do the talking."
Mr. McDonald tapped on the receiver a couple times to get the operator's attention. Suddenly, Betty was on the line.
"Betty, get me Sergeant O'Malley at police headquarters and make sure to keep those busybodies that have nothing to do but listen in on other people's business off this line. I hate party lines."
Betty replied a moment later.
"Here's Sergeant O'Malley for you, Al." "Sergeant O'Malley, this is Mr. McDonald, the principal over at the high school. I need you to send one of your officers to pick up a student who assaulted one of my teachers. I'd also like to file charges against him. Oh, and while I have you on the phone, do you know if Judge Harden is still running the juvenile courts?"
Sergeant O'Malley replied,
"Yes, Al. Judge Harden is presiding over all juvenile cases since Judge Hamilton died. As for the student, you'll need to come down and sign a complaint before charges can officially be filed against the boy. O'Malley, just send the paperwork with the officer. I'll sign it here."
"Is the kid violent? Do you think I need to send 2 officers?" Sergeant O'Malley asked. Mr. McDonald turned around to look at Ed.
"Yeah, he's a strong kid, At least have your officer bring handcuffs." "All right. I'll send Officer Alexander when he gets back. He'll be able to handle a high school kid."
Mr. McDonald looked at Ed and asked,
"Can you see how this story develops? Judge Hardin owes me plenty of favors. He's the one you're going to need to convince you're not the troublemaker I say you are."
Principal McDonald leans in closer to Ed.
"Are you starting to get the picture, you smartass?"
Principal McDonald continued,
"Huh? Do you see that picture behind my desk?"
Principal McDonald points behind him to a massive picture housed in a golden frame.
"That's Abraham Lincoln, a man of integrity. They say he never told a lie. I fancy myself after that great man. Ed, you think I'm cooking up a wild story about you? If so, you're right. In this case, I'm doing it because I feel it's in the school's best interest to get rid of you for good. I'm telling you this because now you're going to learn how the world works. You see, young man, Judge Hardin had kids that attended my school, and it has always been my job to ensure his kids get higher grades and that all-important letter from me that gets them into the colleges he's always wanted. So you can now see why you don't stand a chance in Judge Hardin's court. I'm the cornerstone of this town. Everyone that's influential owes me favors and plays by my rules."
Ed suddenly stood up, forcing his chair back, turned toward Mr. Willis and O'Brien as to say, "Keep your distance." They both stood up, wide-eyed, and stepped back, showing a reluctance to go after him. Ed spoke for the first time since they brought him into Principal McDonald's office. Ed, with a commanding voice, said,
"Mr. McDonald, you've just proven that you are as big a jerk as I always thought you were. I've sat here and listened to all the crap pour out of your mouth about responsibility. Well, now it's my turn. These three no-goods stand under trees at lunch, smoking cigarettes while so-called tough guys pick on kids. These kids come to me and ask me for help, so I kick some butt to help the kids out. I always end up in your office. You yell at me, make a fool of yourself, suspend me for a couple days, and never ask the kids or me how the fights start. You say you've had enough? Well, so have I. I'm leaving. I'm not sitting here and waiting to get framed by a stupid jerk that compares himself to the greatest president of all time. Oh, and by the way, President George Washington never told a lie. Not Lincoln. That's just one more thing you're wrong about. If the police want me, they can find me at my house."
Ed turned around toward the door.
"If these three stooges wish to try and stop me, they'll need more than ice when the fight's over."
Ed continued toward the door, staring in the eyes of the three teachers, with his face full of anger. Ed stomped his foot loudly on the floor toward the teachers, causing them to flinch and take a step backward. Al looked at Clancy, O'Brien, and Willis and screamed,
"Are you boys just going to stand there? Go get him and bring him back."
Clancy told him,
"No way, boss. I already have a shiner. I'll have trouble explaining this one."
So Principal McDonald told Mr. O'Brien to get the no-good bum and hold him until the officers get here. Mr. O'Brien answered,
"Not me. It was hard enough trying to control him outside. Let the police handle him. That's why we pay him."
Al McDonald yelled,
"Where in the hell is Johnson? I'll bet he wouldn't put up with this crap." He had to go to the bathroom,"
Tom said to Mr. Willis. Principal McDonald looked at the three dumbfounded and asked,
"What the hell is going on at my school? A student gets up and walks out and none of you no-goods will lift a hand to stop him?"
Al McDonald, who was about to have a nervous breakdown, clenched his fists and yelled,
"And what the heck is happening at my school?"
The three just stood and looked down sheepishly. A couple minutes after Ed walked out, Johnson walked into the room. Al, red-faced, screamed out loud,
"It's about time you got back, Johnson. You missed all the fun. While you were taking a leak, Ed threatened me, and these jackasses just stood there and let him call me every foul word a person can be called. Then the hoodlum walked out."
Johnson immediately came back with,
"Boss, it's a good thing I wasn't here. I would have kicked his ass."
Principal McDonald shouted out,
"Shut up, Ken. You're as big a chicken as those pieces of crap. Don't tell us how tough you are after the actions are over."
Suddenly, a rhythmic knock is heard at the office door.
"What the hell is that noise?"
exclaimed Principal McDonald nervously. Officer Alexander opened the door and walked in. Principal McDonald, with anger in his voice, erupted with,
"It's about time you got here, officer. We had a maniac kid who assaulted Mr. Clancy get up and walk out. Officer, look at what that kid did to Mr. Clancy's eye. That criminal threatened the four of us and just walked out."
Officer Alexander wanted to know,
"You four didn't try to stop him?" "No, officer. We didn't want to be charged with child abuse,"
answered Tom O'Brien. Officer Alexander laughingly told him,
"I don't blame you. 4 grown men against 1 teenage boy, that might have been the wrong thing to do. After all, he's an underage kid."
Mr. O'Brien spoke again and said,
"No matter what you think, officer, that kid's dangerous. Look at what he did to Mr. Clancy's face."
Officer Alexander told Principal McDonald,
"If you give me his address, I'll go over, have a talk to him, and get his side of the story."
Al McDonald erupted, almost to the point of yelling at Officer Alexander.
"His side of the story? There is no his side. He assaulted one of my teachers and threatened all of us. His side? That's crazy."
Officer Alexander handed Principal McDonald papers that Sergeant O'Malley sent to be signed. The officer told him,
"Sergeant O'Malley sent us paperwork for you to fill out. I'll go talk to the kid and take the paperwork back to Sergeant O'Malley. He'll forward it to the juvenile courts."
Principal McDonald said to Mr. Willis,
"See if you can get Judge Hardin on the phone. That no-good old son of a gun owes me favors. Now it's time for him to pay up."
Mr. Willis wanted to know,
"What kind of favors, Al?" "None of your business, Mark. You boys get back to your classes. I'll handle this from here on out."
Tom O'Brien handed the phone to Al McDonald, saying,
"Here's Judge Hardin, boss. He said you better make it short. He said he needs to get back to the courtroom right away." "Judge, this is Al McDonald over at the high school. When can we get together and talk about a kid that will come before you soon?"
Judge Hardin responded with,
"How about Saturday? I'll be at the club. Jerry and I'll be playing cards with the usual bunch." "That sounds good, Carl. I'll see you Saturday around 2.
Officer Alexander walked out of Principal McDonald's office with a smile and shook his head. After leaving the school, Officer Alexander headed straight for Ed's house. As he pulled into the graveled driveway, Joni, Ed's younger sister, turned to her mom and said,
"Look, a police car is coming in our driveway."
Ed's mom, Mabel, told Joni to go in the house and take the clothes basket with her. We'll finish folding them later. Officer Alexander got out of his car and walked toward the house. He walked up the steps, stuck out his hand, and asked,
"Miss Hall, I presume? I'm Officer Alexander. Is your son Ed at home?"
Mabel told him,
"No, he's not home from school yet."
Officer Alexander went on to say,
"I'm here to talk to him about an incident that occurred earlier today."
Mabel, concerned, said,
"It must be something serious to get the police involved."
Officer Alexander told her,
"It might be. Not sure until I talk to Ed. Here's my card, has my name and badge number. When he gets home, you make sure he contacts me so we can get this matter straightened out."
Mabel let him know.
"I sure will, officer. Can you give me some idea what the matter's about?"
Officer Alexander surprised her by saying,
"It hit a teacher on school grounds. I saw Mr. Clancy's eye. It's quite the shiner."
Mabel told him,
"I'll make sure Ed gets in touch with you right away."
Officer Alexander turned and walked back to his car and drove off. Mabel just stood on the porch looking at the officer's card. Now, later that afternoon, John Hall, Ed's dad, pulled into the driveway. Mabel was on the porch with Jody, waiting for Ed to come home. John got out of his truck and started walking across the lawn, shouting,
"What the hell was a police car doing at the house?"
Mabel immediately said,
"John, something happened at school. Ed hit a teacher. This might be big trouble for Ed. I've been waiting for him to come home so he can tell his side of the story. John, he hadn't shown up yet. I'm starting to worry. He always comes home if there's been trouble at school.
John told Mabel.
If Ed's hit a teacher intentionally, there will be hell to pay at school, but he's also going to have a problem with me.
Mabel told him.
Don't jump to conclusions, John. We haven't heard Ed's side of the story yet.
Art, Ed's younger brother, walked across the front lawn from the streets, up the steps, threw his books on the table, and asked if anyone'd seen Ed.
Mom, it sounds like he's in big trouble at school. He fought with Scott brothers when Mr. Clancy stepped into what Ed's punches.
Mabel asked.
Did you see what happened?
Art told her.
No, Walter told me what happened. I was on the other side of the school ground. I would have jumped in to help Ed kick the hell out of those two jerks.
Mabel said to Art.
Watch your language.
He responded with,
Yes, Mom.
Mabel, with a worried look on her face, said,
Looks like the only thing we can do is wait for him to come home and tell his side of the story.